From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
What to make of the new inflation figures, as well as the political verdicts rendered by voters in Wisconsin and beyond. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. The Labor Department on Wednesday released new inflation figures in the Consumer Price Index. And the first bit of good news is the dip in the year-over-year figure. From July 2021 to 2022, prices rose 8.5%. That's a small drop from last month's figure of 9.1%. But even more intriguing is the month-over-month increase reported today, and that was 0%. And here is President Biden enthusing on Wednesday about that figure.
Actually, I just want to say a number. 0. Today, we received news that our economy had 0% inflation in the month of July. 0%. Here's what that means. While the price of some things went up last month, the price of other things went down by the same amount. The result, 0 inflation last month, but people were still hurting. But 0 inflation last month. When you couple that with last week's booming jobs report of 528,000 jobs created last month and 3.5% unemployment, it underscores the kind of economy we've been building.
Alicia, can you give us a better sense, as the president said, some things went up and other things went down. Can you give us a better sense of how this all nets out? And is it too much to hope for that we're now past the peak inflation?
I think you still have to keep in mind that inflation, or the CPI, is still up 8.5% year over year. The main reason that the overall CPI went down or has been flat was because of declining energy prices, particularly gasoline and as well as natural gas, which had really spiked during the spring, in part due to the war in Ukraine. But gasoline and natural gas prices have both fallen, in part because of concerns that the economy is slowing down, both the U.S. and the global economy, and the demand is declining. So you've seen oil and gas prices actually moderate some, and that was really the main contributor to the flat CPI. But you also saw the modulation in energy prices kind of filter through to some other things like airfares. Airfares had been increasing throughout the spring, and those actually declined. You also saw a decline in rental cars and hotels, which is kind of interesting because we continue to hear that there's still very strong demand for travel, but we actually saw a decline in those industries. Continued increases in food, that we are not seeing food prices moderate at all. Those are things that really hit consumers because that's what we disproportionately spend money on, especially the low-income folks. You actually saw Tyson reported earlier that consumers have been shifting to lower price cuts of beef and chicken, increasingly chicken, as they try to pare back their spending. And the spending report on the other month actually showed that people are actually buying less groceries. And that's one way they're trying to cut back. So I don't think there's much consolation in this CPI report. I think you're going to get a 1 month flat line. But I think other prices of rents are continuing to increase. You're seeing the price of rent of shelter or the primary residence that actually went up. And I think that will continue to contribute. There's still a lot of wage pressure in the economy and markets, and you're seeing that manifest in the labor reports, and that's going to continue to filter through to higher service prices. Medical services, for instance, and other healthcare services have continued to increase. So I think this is a 1 month respite from skyrocketing prices, but I don't think we've conquered inflation as Joe Biden seems to suggest.
That seems to be the big question, how much this inflation dynamic has been entrenched in services and across the broader economy. And the number that economists like to point to is core inflation minus food and energy, because food and energy are more volatile. So the idea is that core inflation provides a better sense of the overall trend. And year over year, that's still at 5.9%. And similar to the overall number, the month-to-month figure, June to July, is relatively low compared to the recent trend. So from June to July, all items less food and energy up 0.3%. But I guess I would make 2 points, Kim. One is that annualized, that is still a pretty high figure. I think higher than the Fed definitely wants it. And the second is that those numbers can be a little bit noisy. And as Alicia suggests, this might be a 1 month respite before we get some higher numbers again. So the number again from June to July is 0.3. Well, if you look back, that's the same figure that we had in March of 2022, which was soon after followed by 0.6 and 0.6 and 0.7 in the subsequent 3 months.
Right. This is 1 month. And as you say, on an annualized basis, that is still way higher than the Fed would want it. The Fed's kind of target inflation rate is about 2%. So we are running well beyond that. And if you dig into the figures that made up that core index, it's a little disturbing. There are still huge areas where we saw price increases kind of across the board. And as Alicia was noting, in shelter, in medical care, in motor vehicle insurance, in home furnishings and home services, in new vehicles, in recreation. There were a few areas that did drop: used vehicles, airline fares, communication. But overall, the trend is still that in significant portions of the economy, excluding food and energy, numbers are going up. And as for that monthly change of 0 that the president was bragging about, again, that really is almost entirely a function of gas prices dipping and therefore offsetting some increases in big things like groceries. For the record, grocery prices are running 13.1% increase year on year, which is the fastest inflationary pressure since 1971. And these are the things that people really feel in their pocketbook. So the president can stand there at the podium. People can feel happy that going to the gas station isn't quite so bad just right now, as bad as it was. But overall, people aren't really seeing any kind of big changes in the things that they need to get through week to week and month to month.
But to the point about President Biden standing at the podium and trying to make the case that we've broken the back of this inflation, I mean, I was almost surprised that he wasn't taking credit for the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which went through the Senate over the weekend. And I know it still hasn't passed the House, but maybe the inflation just saw this bill coming and it got too scared. I mean, Alicia, it really does show the way that politicians try to surf these economic trends. And I mean, maybe this is a better analogy: get to the front of the parade. Because if this is the peak inflation number and we start seeing some moderation in coming months, I fully expect that President Biden and Democrats will say, look at this bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. It says it right in the title. And look, we've reduced inflation. And I just don't know that that's actually going to be true, even though that's going to be the political argument that I expect.
Right. And actually, the other argument Biden is making is that his strategic petroleum reserve releases, which is about almost 1 million barrels per day, are really helping tame oil prices, as well as his other regulatory actions, his threats to go after big oil and other, big companies who are, quote unquote, price gouging. The reality is that the strategic petroleum releases are really a drop in the bucket, that the big contributor is just the slowing global economy and concerns that we could dip into a recession if we aren't already there. China's lockdowns have really helped reduce global demand for energy in general and oil. And so Biden is basically, ironically, kind of riding a wave into the recession. If anything can take credit for this drop in inflation, it really is the slowing economy. Consumers, to some extent, may have less to spend because inflation has been so high. And so they're kind of scaling back, and they're worried that the country is slouching toward a recession and that maybe jobs and employment could become more precarious. So if he wants to take credit for it, he also needs to take credit for an economic slowdown.
But I think the example that Alicia brings up is a very good one. Remember, months ago, President Biden was sending these letters to oil companies, and he was pointing out that there was a gap between oil prices and gasoline prices, and that it was larger than it had been in the past. It seemed to be growing, and haranguing them, kind of saying it was their patriotic duty to do something about this, to lower gasoline prices. And that strikes me as the kind of thing that a politician does for one purpose, and that's to build a political argument that they've done something that they can go show to their voters. And what we really have here is gas prices declining for totally unrelated reasons. I mean, maybe part of it is the recessionary worries that Alicia's talking about. People are buying fewer airplane tickets than they used to. They're tightening their budgets a bit. Maybe part of it is the end of the summer vacation, the summer driving season, but these broader trends. But again, I fully expect that President Biden, if we continue to see lower gas prices, is going to try to take credit for that.
Here's another reason he might have stood up at the podium, too. In fact, it was to get the Inflation Reduction Act over the line. There had been some talk that if the CPI numbers came in this week and they were as bad as they had been last month, or even worse, that it would have dramatically increased the pressure on House Democrats who are due to come back on Friday to maybe not vote for a bill that's going to wash yet more money into the economy and potentially worsen inflation. So in a way, you can say that these numbers were a slight bit of a reprieve and a boost to them for that vote on Friday, and that the president and others will say, look, things are better. All the more reason for us to pass this bill, which will make it better still. I would note that they should probably be very careful for what they wish for, because remember, one of the few good pieces of news in these CPI numbers were falling energy and gasoline prices. What does their Inflation Reduction Act actually do? It targets oil and gas and energy as part of their clean energy initiative. So if anything, this bill could wreck some of the progress that we've seen for the reasons you guys have outlined as to why energy prices were coming down. This could actually get in the way of that continuing.